All right, and welcome back, everyone, to another rendition of Sit Downs with Charlie Brown, my exclusive podcast here on my YouTube channel. Today, I am very fortunate to have a very, very special guest, someone I have known for a very long time, but you guys are probably meeting for the first time today, Mr. Alden Prueher, or I don't know if you have an alias or something you want to go by, so I can just call you Alden or whatever you prefer.
Sure, you can just stick with that.
Yeah. So I was just thinking the other day, like how long we've known each other, and I think it was like almost a good years. Like we first met in Boy Scouts, ironically enough. We were both in the same troop, and we sort of, I'd say our friendship started just from both having the interest in like movies, video games, and all the other stuff usual teenage boys have in common.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember going to your house and watching like some of even spoof videos, and it was great.
Yeah,
Absolutely just
those were
enjoying
fun
it. Just
times. Those were
yeah,
fun times.
absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, the reason why I invited you on here today is for a very important reason. That is the new Spider-Man, as you are the only person I know who is the expert aficionado in Spider-Man, man, or Marvel
Yeah.
superheroes in general. So I figured, obviously the new movie just came out, and I feel like there's a lot to dissect with it. But before I begin, I should note that there will be major, major spoilers. So please, if you have not seen the film yet, I recommend you click off if you do not want to be spoiled. So yeah.
Mhm.
So anyway, uh, from seeing the, like, here's the thing. I kind of knew, obviously one of the biggest issues when thinking about like the Spider-Man movies in general, you had like the Tobey Maguire series, you had the Garfield series, and now you had
Mhm.
the newest one of Tom Holland. Like the big thing people often questioned was like what do all three of these movies connect, or are they just all three different renditions? So that's the big thing I noticed. Like obviously when the first, like I think it was like the second trailer or something, or like it was either the first or second trailer where they showed Doc Ock from the Maguire Spider-Man. Man,
Mhm.
so I'd say like I mean after that moment, I knew that the movie they were just about to do was going to be incredibly ambitious. So yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I saw, I mean, pretty much after the second movie of Far From Home, I started to pick up the pieces where I'm like, okay, so at the end, they pretty much revealed that Peter
Mhm.
Parker's identity has been revealed to the public. And I'm like, the only possible way to kind of dig through this was if they showed other, I mean, they didn't show it in the movie, but like I thought if they were going to bring a couple other Spider-Man,
Yeah.
swing around the city, trying to be like, okay, this is going to bring,
Yeah.
Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. I didn't think it was going to be like a big, like a big thing between those 2, but they definitely made it a big deal in
Yeah.
this film.
Cuz I feel like it wasn't obviously probably on their minds at the time. They always did want to try and make sense of like what what like both Maguire and Garfield meant to like sort of this larger MCU. Because when you think about it, like I feel like I kind of always feel like Toby Maguire was essentially like one of the first men to take the first step
Mhm.
because of his original role as Spider-Man. Man.
Yeah,
'Cause
I mean, I think when we all grow up with Tobey Maguire, he's like the most iconic character
mhm,
with Tobey Maguire. It was just awesome, and I'm like, this is I mean, I grew up with Spider-Man at a very young age. I
yeah,
mean, and the film pretty much wrapped up during a tough time for America. I mean, it was really pretty much right after 9/11.
yeah,
And I think when that happened and this movie released, it kinda helped society a little bit because of how
mhm,
iconic bringing a superhero
yeah,
to life, but with what they did with the movie was just so great and
mhm,
impacted superhero movies, and I think
yeah,
that's just what makes Tobey Maguire very
mhm,
iconic as Spider-Man.
yeah, and it really just kind of, I feel, opened this gateway for what became like superhero films. Because then they were doing like the Fantastic Four movies, then they were
Mhm.
transitioning into a few years later they did the Iron Man movies. It just sort of, I think, spawned this kind of chain reaction that got superhero films to what they are today, especially with Marvel.
Oh,
So
absolutely, yeah, I mean, it definitely right after that big movie, especially with other like DC films, it
Hmm.
definitely picked up pretty big to push up, great stories to explore, just to kind of get out and just enjoy your, favorite superhero. Was
Yeah,
really awesome. And then
yeah,
him and we haven't seen Tobey Maguire in the suit for about what, 13 to 14 years.
yeah, yeah, and lo and behold, spoiler alert, that he actually shows up in this film. So I here's the thing, like, and I said this for the longest time, because another thing I feel like we kind of need to discuss is sort of like with Andrew Garfield, who obviously kind of was obviously had a lot of flack when he was doing the two Amazing Spider-Man movies, but
Hmm.
regardless, people still supported him for how he did it, because I thought he did an okay job. Like, would I choose him over, like, if you had to make me choose between Maguire, Holland, and Garfield, I think majority of people would choose either Maguire or Holland, just
Hmm.
just because I feel like it's either you're a fan of the classic or you're more of a fan of this newer rendition, I'd say.
Yeah. Um, I mean, when Andrew Garfield went for Spider-Man and Peter Parker, I mean, I was definitely not happy at the time because they were rebooting the Spider-Man series
Hmm.
essentially. And I was getting ready for Spider-Man 4. And then when that got canceled, they wanted to reboot it. And that was because due to the fact that if they didn't make a movie with Spider-Man within a matter of set of years,
Yeah.
technically Marvel Studios would have taken the rights back. So that's why they essentially made
Yeah.
this movie, was just to keep going with Spider-Man. And how they executed the story was, the stories aren't entirely bad. It's just they
Mhm.
focused on a lot of side stories that just couldn't make a great full
Yeah.
story. It was everywhere with his parents, which personally for me, I didn't really like that.
Mhm.
Um, but I loved the way he played as Spider-Man was a great Spider-Man with the quips, the
Mhm.
snarky remarks and all. It was great. I just
Yeah.
think the parents aspect was just a little bit far-fetched and just not a
Mhm.
main focus really. It was like a side story.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was sort of the thing. Like, I thought he did a great job as Spider-Man. Like, the big thing with me that I had was, you know, I did when I first look at him, like, I didn't really get that Spider-Man feel. Like, when you see like Maguire, like, he looked like your typical like nerdy kid with glasses. Like, that's kind of what Peter Parker is. With Garfield, I kind of really didn't get that vibe, which isn't his fault entirely. It's
Mhm.
just I feel like he really didn't give me the vibe of Spider-Man, like from his looks, which isn't a bad thing, but just kind of what
No,
I.
yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, agree with you. I mean, the way how I kind of put it out there is that Tobey Maguire plays a great Peter Parker and an okay Spider-Man.
Mhm.
And then Andrew Garfield plays an okay Peter Parker, but a great
Yeah.
Spider-Man. Tom Holland, for me, I say he is 50% great as Peter Parker and 50% great as Spider-Man. And
Mhm.
I think I just kind of choose him right now, Tom Holland, because he
Yeah.
does great balancing it,
Mhm.
especially in
Yeah.
Amazing Spider-Man 2. I feel like they we all complained about, Peter's is kind of a weird aspect, and then they're like, okay, we're gonna focus a lot on Peter, which
Mhm.
was just kind of weird because
Yeah.
the aspect of Andrew Garfield's acting was great as
Mhm.
Spider-Man, but for some reason I felt like they tried to keep him out of the suit and
Yeah.
work on
And
his Peter character.
that's the thing, like, another thing I feel like it's important with Garfield is, like, he obviously, at the time they were still doing this, he was having issues with Sony, like, for the longest time. So, like, when the rumors start coming out about potentially putting both Maguire and Garfield in it, I figured, like, with Maguire it would be possible, but it would require a lot of convincing, just because he hasn't been, just because he would consider it, because, like, I looked at his, like, what he was doing before, like, before this film, and, like, he really wasn't doing anything. Couple, like, independent or shorter films, but nothing like big or noteworthy to draw your pin on. Like, the big one I think he last did was The Great Gatsby, but that,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
So I figured, like, you could probably get him with Garfield. I did not see him coming back, just because he didn't. He was still probably upset with Sony, and he just really couldn't. I just didn't really see the possibility of him coming back. Like they may reference him, but other than that, I didn't think he'd be on board. But lo and behold, he proved me wrong and he came back, which I honestly didn't expect that. I honestly did not expect him coming back.
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of said, just from Far From Home, I kind of knew that he was going to come back too. For me, it was just the fact that this movie, which I think we're going to get into, is that they have a lot of redeeming qualities for the past Spider-Man, and just like kind of clarifying like what's been going on with them.
Yeah.
And like we'll get into that more. But I mean, just how like I said, how they handled Andrew Garfield Spider-Man was just kind of very disrespectful. The way, because they were getting ready for the next Spider-Man, which was Amazing Spider-Man 3. It was going to be about the Sinister Six, and then after Amazing Spider-Man 2 just did really bad in the box office, they just decided to cut it out and join MCU, which is not a bad deal. It's just I felt like that was a very terrible way to just kind of throw that actor pretty much in the trash.
Yeah, and like that's the thing. I know the reason why I feel like they weren't really, I think originally they were not planning to do that. The reason why is because at the time they were also having issues because Garfield, sorry, was there were reports coming out that he was not happy with executives, like he was skipping meetings, and he states that it was like for mental health reasons, which if that's the case, then like I totally get that because I'm someone who knows way too much about that. But I felt like that it was sort of like they had no other option really.
Yeah, and I could understand that. I wish they just kind of put more clarification, but then I'm just going to start going to the segue of going to Tom Holland when he was kind of first announced, which was back in, I think, 2016, when just pretty much Captain America Civil War was about to come out.
Yeah, it was.
And I think it was right at the beginning of just starting to film the movie. They just got the rights for Spider-Man, and they jumped the gun on it quick, and they're like, all right, we need to cast our next Spider-Man. And you know, they went through a lot of actors, and I think a couple of runner-ups was Asa Butterfield. He played in the movie Hugo and a couple other movies that I didn't really remember. I think it was Ender's Game as well.
Oh yeah.
And then there was another actor, I'm trying to remember. He was the main character for Maze Runner. His name was Dylan something.
Oh yeah. I know who you're referring to.
Yeah, and then I liked him the most. I'm like, I think he'd be playing a great Peter Parker and Spider-Man, but they really wanted to go for a young Peter Parker aspect, an actual young age actor. And when I saw Tom Holland, it took me a lot of convincing. I'm like, I do not know if I actually like this character, but when I saw him in Civil War and even in the trailer, I'm like, he has definitely got me hooked on this type of Spider-Man.
Yeah, you know, because that's what I feel like people want. They kind of want this like young nerdy looking kid to be the Peter Parker, who's essentially the guy behind the mask, essentially. Which I respect that that's one thing they definitely took into consideration, because I feel like it adds a better dynamic to the film, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, when it's a young actor, essentially he could be playing Spider-Man for a long time if he wanted to. I mean, I think Toby was in his early 30s when he got casted as Spider-Man. And a lot of people don't know this, but when Andrew Garfield was casted, he was actually older out of all the Spider-Man that was played Spider-Man, essentially. He's actually the oldest to be casted as Spider-Man. And I can kind of understand to that point where they rebooted it with age difference, but Tom Holland was essentially casted when he was 19 years old back in like 2016. And I believe right now he's like 24 and a half.
Yeah, here, I can check quick how old Holland is, because I have the pages pulled up because I always want to make sure I get my facts straight. Sure. Yeah, he's 25 right now, which he still looks like he's younger than that based on his appearance.
So I mean, how I would rank, I'm gonna do another segue. I don't want to take over your podcast.
Oh yeah, no, dude, you're fine.
I'm absolutely excited doing this podcast with you. I really hope you know that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So
I mean, the way I would rank my Spider-Man films, I'd probably say it would start off with from worst to greatest. I'd say coming down is Amazing Spider-Man. I did not like that one as
Yeah.
much. I think they had some cool aspects. It was just very, very shaky.
Hmm.
Um, and that's just kind of the one that
Yeah.
starts it off with being the worst
Hmm.
batch. And
Yeah.
then kind of coming to is, I mean, the next one was Amazing Spider-Man 2. I really liked that film. I mean, I like most of the films, but the one I absolutely did not like was the first Amazing Spider-Man film. But
Yeah.
Amazing Spider-Man 2, it had some good directions. It's just it was executed very poorly. Um,
Mhm.
what they did with Electro, I think I don't know why Marvel movies and
Yeah.
DC movies kind of keep doing this, is that essentially when they show a villain,
Mhm.
they make them appear very ugly. And I don't like that when they do that kind of type
Yeah.
of films, because when Electro, as when he was Max Dillon, he was dropped in the pool of electric eels.
Hmm.
What happens is that his body's becoming all infused with the electric activity going through his body, and then
Yeah.
essentially fixes his teeth. He had a gap in his teeth,
Hmm.
and he had like his hair was thinning out, pretty much going near bald. And I'm just
Hmm.
like, they really need to stop doing that, because
Yeah.
personally I just feel like it's annoying. But besides that, I mean, the film where Peter Parker is essentially going back and forth with the relationship of Gwen
Hmm.
Stacy, it was definitely interesting, but it
Hmm.
was a very hardly focused on that, and I felt
Hmm.
like you saw less of
Yeah.
um Spider-Man and more of
Hmm.
the relationship between the Peter Parker and Gwen. And
Yeah.
then just oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, I kind of felt the same way. Like the two Amazing Spider-Mans, no disrespect, they're probably bottom of as well, just because of like they didn't have like the greatest execution, and like there were so many problems you can really nitpick with them. So that's kind of what I just wanted to say. So I can
Oh yeah.
agree with you on that.
And then I mean, just the ending. I mean, the ending I thought was as as very sad as it was when Gwen died. I thought that was a great
Yeah.
next chapter for his next movie, because I'm like, okay, first and second aren't that great, but what they're setting up for the next one could be potentially a mass movie where we get what we want, especially when they showed, I mean, the way how they showed Sinister Six was, I thought, was lazy, but I'm like, okay, I'll let it slide. Um, but in the end, sadly, that was
Yeah.
canceled, and we never got to really see that until,
Mhm.
this
Until this
upcoming
film.
film of,
So,
yeah, absolutely. And then the next one, is this is where it starts to get tough for me, but I will probably say Homecoming coming in next.
yeah.
Um, as much as I like the first film, as him being Peter Parker and exploring that, it was definitely a situation where I was uneasy with it, because that all the tech that Peter Parker was getting in the MCU felt like, okay, this is a very lazy way to be like, okay, he essentially doesn't have to search for scraps. He has, the billionaire mentor Tony Stark essentially helping him out with the suit, which was okay, but it wasn't that comic accuracy. And I'm like, okay, so when I saw this film where he had the AI integrated in his suit, him talking to him, I was like, this is great. But the problem for me was he's not really, in the
Yeah.
comics, Peter Parker is pretty much self-reliance on himself.
Hmm.
And I just didn't see that. And I thought this was going to be an okay direction. But for me,
Yeah.
it was very lazy how I felt.
Hmm.
Um, but the way they did this film was uh, really good. We got to see him actually in high school, struggling between Spider-Man and Peter Parker, but mostly Spider-Man,
Hmm.
because essentially he wanted to do his part being the hero. And at a certain point, he just kind of started um, focusing on his suit with all the upgrades. And
Hmm.
essentially that got him in trouble with the main villain and Tony Stark coming in, taking away the
Hmm.
suit. And it showed him at the end that even without the suit, he can still be Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And that definitely just kind of showed saying he can be Spider-Man without the suit,
Mhm.
and just kind of having a great ending. The relationship with Liz Allen was short and sweet, and I think that was great because we all kind of knew at that point where she wasn't going to be the main
Mhm.
girlfriend in the
Yeah.
MCU. But I thought it was a great ending. I thought it was a great film. Still, I mean, just because I put it in, not essentially the worst. It's just this is my opinion of putting it in this place.
Mhm.
Um, and then the next one I probably would want to talk about is Spider-Man 3 with
Yeah.
Tobey Maguire. I mean, a lot of people are going to probably be surprised I put Homecoming and then right after is Spider-Man 3. As
Mhm.
much as that film was terrible, you
Yeah.
have to admit it was still good in
Mhm.
some sections. I mean, I think it was just an overload of
Yeah.
villains.
Mhm.
Um, and it just took a lot out of the story, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah,
You couldn't
definitely.
you couldn't balance Venom, Sandman, and the
Yeah.
new Goblin as he's not the Hobgoblin apparently, he's the new Goblin.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, just how they it was a mess of a story, but I still enjoyed it. Even the memes today with Bully McGuire being
Bully
it's
Maguire.
I mean, he still lives up to this day, and I
Yeah.
think you could definitely see his meme is never gonna die.
Yeah.
Um, but it was definitely an okay film. I just like it because it's just nostalgia reasons.
Mhm.
But the next one would probably be uh, Spider-Man Far From Home. And Far
Yeah.
From Home essentially was a good film. Um, Definitely taking out a couple of problems that I was starting to get worried about, but still, it was kind of still there. Was that everybody at this point in time when Iron Man died essentially in
Mhm.
Avengers Endgame? And that's not a spoilers because Endgame has been
That
out for
that
about two
yeah,
to
that
three
movie's been
years.
out for like I think that was like what 2018, 2019 or something like that. So
2019,
yeah,
yeah.
2019. So it's been out for like almost almost 2 years. So
If you
yeah.
haven't seen it, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But it was kind of great because everybody was thinking about that. Is Peter Parker going to be the next Iron Man? And essentially, it wasn't that the fact at this point. I
No.
mean, in the story, he was struggling
Yeah.
on is he the next Iron Man
Yeah.
Junior technically, and in the end, it wasn't. It was about him just essentially
Yeah.
becoming Spider Man.
I think the reason why they didn't want to do that is because, they did. I think they're kind of waiting on possibly what on seeing like maybe they could try a different direction. Because I did hear rumors that possibly doing in end game, obviously he and Pepper had a daughter, maybe having her be the next Iron Man, but they're still trying to figure out like if they even want to continue the character essentially.
I mean, absolutely. With the character of Iron Man after he died, they actually, throughout the films of the MCU, they have a good spreadsheet of who could be the next Iron Man, essentially. I
Hmm.
mean, there was his best friend, Rhodey, who was War Machine slash Iron Patriot. And the kid in Iron Man 3 who was Harley.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
in the co- in the comics, he could actually be considered Iron Lad if they decide to do that.
Yeah.
Pepper could have been the next one, but we definitely don't see it as a
A
absolute
guarantee.
reason for yeah. And then there was his daughter,
Mhm.
and well, at the moment she looks very young. I don't know if we would want an Iron Kid doing the battles yet.
Yeah.
But I think what they're doing with the next direction, I think it's Ironheart, which is Riri Williams going to be playing the next woman in the Iron Man suit, which
Oh
I think is a
yeah.
great idea. And her show is going to be coming out, I think, in the next few years. And
Yeah.
I'm essentially excited for that, especially that she'll be in the Armor War TV show with Rhodey. And I think that's pretty cool. But back on Spider Man.
Yeah. Back on
um,
Spider-Man.
but back on Spider Man, the way how they ended it with no Far From Home, it was great because it just kind of showed that it was kind of becoming a balance where it's like, hey, he can be Spider-Man and still have the tech suits where it was still going to help him. And I'm like, that's a great idea. And then the ending, I think, was just a big drop, where
Yeah.
they revealed his identity was, okay, this could go really good or
Mhm.
really bad. And I was actually, at this point, I was getting scared because not just for the story of Spider-Man, but the rights for
Oh
Spider-Man was
yeah.
becoming such a clutter where
Mhm.
a Marvel, Sony, and Disney deal was becoming very cluttered, and the talks of Sony coming out. I mean, there was essentially, I think, about a month or about, yeah, I'd
Yeah.
probably say about a
Because
month
like
where,
yeah, because I think because I do think you have something there because I think like it was shortly after in which uh Sony and Marvel were starting to butt heads and people were questioning like are we going to lose Spider-Man again? So
yeah, I mean, it was a big scare because it was announced where they're like, there's no more films coming out for Spider-Man. It
yeah.
felt like it felt like literally a big divorce between Sony
Hmm.
and Marvel.
Yeah. But
And
yeah, but the big thing
it
is like big sort of like I was didn't mean to interrupt you, but like the calmer heads presume sort of resolved the issue and they are so apparently working okay together. For how long I don't know, but it just kind of it was like a big scare for the fans and was ultimately just avoided. So
oh yeah, I mean, how it was taken care of was not Peter Parker, I'm sorry, Tom Holland just essentially, I think, talking to I think it was big producer. He was like just
yeah,
saying like how much he appreciate, because he thought he was done at that point.
yeah, because he essentially thought like I may never suit up again and like maybe just focusing on other projects. So
Oh yeah, and then that's where he finally squeezed out at least one more film,
mhm,
and that's essentially where No Way Home came
yeah,
up. But after Far From Home, definitely, as I'm getting to, Spider-Man 1 is going to be my
yeah,
next film. Um, it's still a great film. I think it still lives up to date, even though the era is very different from,
yeah,
about 19 years ago. It's still a great film.
yeah,
Uh,
definitely,
I mean, they definitely changed a couple things in the comics where he had the organic webbing, which is
yeah,
another thing we'll probably talk about in the new film that came out. It
yeah,
was great. Um, but that's, I mean, I don't want to take too much time, but it was a great film.
yeah,
You don't really have to argue about it
yeah,
with how good the story was. And
yeah,
then the next film would be Spider-Man 2.
yeah.
Um,
I
I mean, if it was going to be a toss up, honestly, between Spider-Man 2 and No Way Home, these literally stack in the middle.
yeah,
The reason why I'm putting Spider-Man 2 is, first of all, Spider-Man 2 is just, it's a flawless film. It has no problems whatsoever.
mhm,
Um, and it's just so great of
yeah,
how a movie could be executed.
mhm,
I mean, without any flaws. And it was just especially the story that they chose was just
yeah,
great for the writing.
yeah.
Um,
Especially since like I think it's high on a lot of people's list because it includes possibly one of the most iconic Spider-Man villains in Doc Ock, which I think that's what I think was a big drawing point because obviously Spider-Man's had a lot of battles, but I feel like the one people remember the most is like that first like one of the first comics where he faces Dr. Octopus. So
Oh yeah, that was a very iconic villain, and just the story, it was just a very sweet story. I mean, how they pretty much balanced it out was just amazing. And even when they came out with the extended version of the movie, it makes it even sweeter, essentially.
mhm,
And I just thought, I mean, till this day, it's one of my favorite films. I mean, it was just
yeah.
great. And then the next one is No Way Home. Uh, and I'm gonna get into that, but I just want to know what's your top Spider-Man films from worst to best.
Yeah, so from worst, it goes uh, Spider-Man 2 is at the bottom just because I didn't like it just had too many bugs that I could pick
Amazing
compared.
Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, Amazing Spider-Man 2. Like, don't get me wrong, I had some good points, but I feel like from a story aspect, it felt like it spent way too much time on like Peter Parker instead of Spider-Man. Man, like there wasn't
Mhm.
that balance like that you need for it. The second one would actually be the first one because even though I feel feel like it's probably the weak out of the two, it's probably the weaker one. I do feel like I like the integration of how they I do like appreciate how they did a different villain of the lizard. I felt like, Kurt Connors, the role he kind of played was very flawless in it. And I think it
Mhm.
just really kind of fit with everything.
Sure.
The next one, I would probably agree that I would say Homecoming. Not that it is bad, because I really I like a lot of the things I do is how they set up the characters. Like I did like the how they did. Sorry, I can't talk. I did like Vulture. I will say that. I wasn't a big fan of how they did Shocker though. It just seemed like he was a supporting side character. That was my big thing.
He was a very small villain that took
Yeah,
place.
yeah, but yeah. Next one, I would probably say Spider-Man 3, and because it's not that it was bad, because I'd say probably my favorite part of that movie was how they did Sandman. I feel like he was the actor for that was great. His storyline was phenomenal. Like I just really wish, like, if that movie was just solely based on Sandman, I thought it would have been way better. But
Oh yeah.
it wasn't really, they didn't really do that. They did three different ones, but it is what it is. Then it would be Far From Home, just because of like all the stuff that was really kind of going on with it at the end. It was really getting messy. But yeah. And then I would probably say it would go the first Spider-Man and then Spider-Man 2, just because like the difference I think between those two is the first one like it obviously was like it has a lot of prestige considering it's the first Spider-Man. The big thing
Yeah.
is I feel like it went it was like it just kind of like you go back and watch it now, you can see it has a little age on it. Like
Oh
it's not
yeah.
bad. It's not bad, but I feel like, if they could do a better version, it could be done better. But
Oh yeah.
it is what it is. And then two, I still hold in high regard because it was the first Maguire film I got to see, and it just had so many great aspects to it. The storyline of both Peter and Spider-Man. You had Doc Ock's role. Well, you had so many of these great details in the film that it still matches up to this day, even if it's been like a few years since it's been out. So
Oh yeah. I
mhm.
I can agree with your list. I mean, for me though, my list is always going to fluctuate. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to admit, even a week before I saw Spider-Man, I saw it opening night. The week before I saw Spider-Man, I literally watched all the films in order,
Oh yeah,
and
no. Before I went to the theater too, I just like make sure I checked up on like, okay, do I need I made sure I watched all like the Maguires. I made sure I knew all the Garfields. I make sure I didn't really do a
oh
lot of the
yeah,
Hollands because like they're more recent, but yeah.
sure. I mean, I watched all of them just for the heck of it, and just to make sure that if there's anything that's gonna be put into the movies, I was gonna understand what they're
Mhm.
talking about. And then let's just kind of get into No Way Home.
Yeah.
What are your first thoughts about it?
I gotta say, like, the biggest thing, like, especially from the trailers that I knew going into this, was like, could this be done? Like, you are essentially taking on one massive, ambitious project, including all, because you were teasing that you were including essentially characters from all three different film franchises that were made,
Oh
three
yeah.
different timelines, essentially, and you did it almost flawlessly, in, like beyond expectations, because my biggest thing is that I realized is, kind of like how hard this must have been for like the guys making this, because you obviously had like so many great characters, like you essentially needed to kind of make sure this is perfect and goes beyond expectations,
Oh
especially.
yeah. I mean, a lot of people had a lot of hype in this film when it was just starting production. I mean, for me, um, it was I knew it was going to be a big project, and then as they were filming, and then once they stopped production, it was just I mean, each month I felt like the hype was getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And I was starting to get scared as this film was getting close because we didn't know if this was the last Spider-Man film. And I think that essentially what they were doing was making it a great final film if
Mhm.
this was going to be the decision of, hey, this is
Yeah.
going to be the last Spider-Man film.
Mhm.
Um, and then as we kind of started getting closer, I mean, leaks were starting to pour out left
Yeah.
and right.
Leaks
And
and
it was,
leaks.
I mean, for an MCU project to kind of spill a lot of leaks, I think this is the one that had the most leaks that
Yeah.
without Tom Holland essentially not
Yeah,
spoiling
no.
it.
Yeah, no, because I remember you always hear the stories like they actually couldn't let him read like the big end scripts for like Endgame and Infinity War just because he could keep his mouth quiet. But yeah,
Oh yeah, he spoiled Homecoming, and I think
yeah,
after that,
he
that was
spoiled
like a permanent.
Homecoming, and
Yeah,
then they were like, yeah, no,
yeah. Um, but like I said, when they film, leaks were starting to come out left and right. Me and my buddy, we're really into Spider-Man. We're like, this is becoming very messy, and that's when the
yeah.
film for me was. I was getting more concerned, where I'm like, this
Are they
could
trying to
be
oversaturate and do too much, essentially?
right. And then I was like, okay. Then they were starting to get leaks. I mean, I don't know if you're trying to avoid leaks, but I started seeing
Yeah,
pictures of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, and it was starting to get hard to essentially starting.
avoid them. Mhm.
Yeah. And then the filmmakers were trying to be like, hey, this is actually fake. And then when experts start coming in, they're like, ah, this is actually real. And then it was becoming so confusing. I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
we're having really high expectations and now this might be fake. I'm like, what direction could this be actually going? Because essentially everybody at this point was hooked on that, saying that, okay, the other two Spider-Man are coming in. This is going to be great. But if we don't see that, this film is probably going to flop just out of that aspect.
hmm
And that's what I was afraid of. This film was about to become very messy. And the marketing standpoint, even before the first trailer that came out, which was, I believe, in October or November,
yeah,
there was already toys coming out, spoiling the film a little bit about either black and gold suit, which we didn't understand what that was going to be, and then essentially his red and black and blue and gold integrated suit. We
hmm
didn't understand that, and then it was literally the night before when they showed the first trailer, the teaser trailer. Essentially, they already leaked the trailer.
yeah,
It was an unfinished trailer that had a lot of CGI work that needed to be worked on in this trailer. And then I was very confused because I'm like, this looks like a very unfinished film. They might be delaying it. And
hmm
then essentially the next day, I think Marvel just said, well, it was a leak. Might as well just put out the full trailer. And when the trailer came out, it was ready to go. It looked
hmm
like it was a finished film.
yeah,
Um, and then the second trailer came out, I think about a month before the
yeah.
the
It
movie
was
came
like
out.
I think January, February when the second one dropped. So
Yeah, and then it was kind of like, all right, well, mm, I thought they were going to delay it essentially because
yeah,
the marketing. I have to say the marketing was just a very terrible job for this film, and
yeah,
I'm like, if this goes through the film, this could be a really bad
hmm
film. And then
yeah,
let's just start ripping into it. The night when it actually came out, when I saw this film, I'm not gonna say it's flawless. It does have a couple of
yeah. It
issues, but
does have its issues, but
I'm not gonna get into it, but we're gonna talk about all the good. And when I saw this film, I'm like, holy smokes. When I saw this, it was like, I'm going to admit this right now. If you saw my messages with my friend who's in California, I predicted half of this movie. And
hmm
I'm gonna say I was a bit proud of myself, but this was just a great film and I love
hmm
how they executed.
yeah, because obviously from a storyline aspect, it was incredible because I feel like the main thing they were trying to do was okay, obviously Peter wants to things to kind of go back to the way they were, obviously
Hmm.
he doesn't want the whole point of Peter Parker is he wants to keep his identity secret just so that he can live a normal life, but now he can't.
Oh yeah. Oh
So
yeah,
now
it's been exposed by Mysterio and he doesn't have a normal life anymore.
Yeah. And then obviously now he tries to go to the to extreme measures by going to Doctor Strange for magic instead of like just go like trying to fix it himself, you know.
Oh yeah, just trying
And
to
then he,
fix that problem.
and then
Yeah.
just and then he just ends up breaking the entire timeline multiverse, and now we see like all like the characters trickle in, you know. We see Doc Ock, we see we see Green Goblin, we see Electrode, Sandman, man, all these different like characters from the different universes start coming in that have been so iconic that it makes more sense that like, okay, so maybe they're just saying like it's kind of like an indication that both the Maguire series and the Garfield series were kind of like alternate universes essentially.
Oh yeah, and it just started to confirm that, and
Hmm.
that's what started when I was watching this film. Like, okay, you know, we saw this in the trailers, and it confirmed that. But when the part where essentially Peter Parker's first villain that he's facing is Doctor Octopus,
Hmm.
and he's definitely talking about how he had the upgraded suit, and then that night it was a good battle between Doc Ock
Yeah.
and I thought it was pretty great. And then it's the part where he takes the nano suit and essentially his arms absorb the
Hmm.
nanotechnology, and before even that happens, he tries to stab Peter with one of his octopus arms, and then he reveals his face, even though he was already revealed to the public. This Doc Ock doesn't know,
Yeah.
and he just says, "You're not Peter Parker," which made me excited, being like, "Okay, this is starting to have a better
Make more
foundation
sense.
showing." Yep, like, okay, this Doctor Octopus could be is pretty much saying that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is still in here. You just gotta wait. And I thought that was great. And like you said, with the when he went to Doctor Strange for help, essentially before the Doctor Octopus scene was just, yeah, what essentially he was kind of looking for was he just wants to have not essentially his, but his other friends and family's life back.
Yeah.
Um, because he got in extremely trouble how Mysterio kind of changed the video, making Peter Parker like a murderer to a very fake superhero. It definitely destroyed his life in
Hmm.
some way. I'd say that they took care of it pretty well.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I want to kind of go back a little bit. But let's talk about another superhero that we haven't really talked into. I'm going to reveal it right now, which is Matt Murdock, the lawyer, and
Yes.
Daredevil showing up.
As
I
someone
mean,
who as someone who watched it, I love how they were able to include him in this. I feel like, you know, he's such a great he had such a great performance in Daredevil that I feel like it was incredible that they got the chance to really include him, which also kind of signifies that, you know, the whole, and I mean, they've done this before, that the sort of the Netflix series they've been doing on Netflix with like Iron Fist, Jessica, uh
yeah,
Luke Cage for the little bit. Unfortunately, those didn't get very long in production. They were kind
and
of,
the Punisher films too.
yeah,
Yeah,
and the
it
Punisher.
definitely.
They kind of link up into the MCU in some way, shape, or form, which I can respect definitely.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
definitely had small like hints in the Netflix series about the films, but it wasn't really close to like, okay, we're actually going to see them in an MCU film.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long essentially Daredevil's been canceled for. I think about 3 to 4 years or something like that.
Yeah,
But
something like
when
that.
when I saw him come, because I literally thought that, because there was rumors that he was going to be in there, and I just assumed that it was going to be a false rumor, and then they actually showed him,
Yeah.
and not only that they're saying that, hey, this is Matt Murdock, but this is literally the original Matt Murdock. Maybe they're going to probably cut a couple storylines from his franchise, but
Yeah.
just the scene where he's talking about his, he's definitely doing lawyer talk and
Hmm.
about, saying that you're pretty protected. Even the Happy, which a lot of people don't know, is that the actor for Happy actually played Foggy Nelson in Ben Affleck's Daredevil.
Yeah.
But anyways, back to the story
But
was,
yeah.
I
But
mean,
yeah.
the part. Oh yeah, go ahead.
My favorite part of with the Matt Murdock scene is how the brick comes in the window and he just catches it. It's like hilarious.
Oh yeah, because at that point it just confirms that this is Daredevil. This is no rebooted version. This is like,
Yeah,
hey, this is a version that you know.
yeah,
And I
definitely.
mean, if you watch the Netflix series, you can definitely tell that it's a very gruesome story, very violent, and now it's technically a little bit incorporated in the MCU. And
Yeah,
I thought that was great. Maybe I wish we could have seen Daredevil in the suit, but from what I heard, I think they already sold the suit and they're going to be making a new one. But
yeah,
it looks like Charlie Cox essentially is going to be returning as Daredevil in some shape, way, or form in
yeah.
future MCU movies.
Mhm.
So let's continue. So right after the bridge scene, essentially Peter goes back to Doctor
Mhm.
Strange's
Cave essentially,
yeah,
and
cave essentially.
essentially we start learning like okay now there's all these villains out on the loose from different universes, and we see like Kurt Connor, the Amazing Spider-Man, Lizard, and like already in one of the cells, and he's like I had to and Doctor Strange had to go look for him in a sewer, which honestly, I think that's kind of I'm not sure if you're familiar with the old plugging game play like Atari games. There was a Spider-Man one where it was you just endlessly searched the sewers for the lizard
Oh
for
yeah,
years.
yeah.
And
That's
that's what
what
I
it
kind
basically the
that was what
same.
I thought of. And I was like, that was a little touch that I was like, I see what you did there. I respect that, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean, for me, I thought they were referencing like an Amazing Spider-Man one, where essentially his lab was underground
Yeah.
in Amazing Spider-Man one, and even in the comics, most of his stuff was in the sewers, and I
Hmm.
thought that was just absolutely great.
Yeah.
And they showed the lizard next, which was just I think
Mhm.
pretty cool. I thought it would make sense that if Doctor Strange definitely took one of the villains just to start saying that, hey, you broke something in the universe and that more
Mhm.
things are going to show up.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
then
then, oh, yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
yeah, yeah. I was just gonna kind of continue. Then then the storyline sort of kind of goes on. Peter starts roping both Ned and MJ into what he's trying to do, which is round up all the villains that are out while Strange tries and fix the
Oh,
spell.
yeah.
And then
And then,
essentially we get to see he goes out into the middle of nowhere where he fights Electro, the Amazing Spider-Man played by Jamie Fox, who honestly I preferred uh the which they made an alteration instead of like just a full blue like character like head to toe of
mhm.
electricity. They actually made it so that he he's more yellow, which is honestly I think better because like we see the original Electrode costume. It's like green and
Yeah.
yellow with like sort of like a normal electricity, which I think that's more realistic. The version they
Oh,
did was way better because it's more believable and realistic.
oh, yeah. When they definitely showed, the alteration of a different, I mean, it's the same Electro from Amazing Spider-Man 2, essentially. It's just some some of the villains react to the different universe of going to the MCU, which they essentially made Jamie Foxx's character a bit better. I mean, I
Yeah,
liked the blue Electro, but there's just a lot of his suit I did not like.
yeah,
Some of it was just a bit weird, but I definitely like this version of Electro. Especially that Jamie Foxx could actually really put out what he wanted for this character
yeah.
was just absolutely cool.
Hmm.
And then the next one was Flint Marco,
Hmm.
Sandman. I was a bit confused of why they kind of made him all CGI in this film,
Yeah,
and they didn't really touch on that because in Spider-Man 3 he could transform into sand and go back to the human form.
yeah.
But in this film it was mostly about he was kind of in a sand form, which maybe
Hmm.
was a alteration in the universe,
Hmm.
making him permanently sand,
Yeah,
but I think it was pretty cool.
yeah. I think it was more for aesthetic purposes. They wanted to kind of add more. I think like him in more of a sand form adds depth to the character.
Sure.
Like it makes him more recognizable compared to where like he's just in like the striped t-shirt and pant and cargo pants. So I
Oh
think
yeah.
that's kind of what they were going for with that I sort of thing. So essentially, after like those two battle each other, we then see Peter return to it, and lo and behold, he learns that the last one still out there is Willem Dafoe's Goblin, who's been kind of on the run, trying to still battle the actual Goblin from Harry Osborn in his head. And it turns out Peter finds him at a shelter where Aunt May works, and essentially he goes there, gets him, and brings him back.
You're talking about Norman Osborn. Harry Osborn's his son.
Norman, sorry,
yeah.
Harry. Harry. Norman Osborn. So yeah.
Yeah. I think they did pretty good on that. I mean, when you see Norman Osborn on the bridge scene, just a quick scene, just exploding, just throwing goblin bombs essentially on the bridge. And then that was pretty much the last villain that they needed to reel in. And honestly, how the villain had a kind of a plan already just for that was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
He was definitely playing the innocent, oh, I'm just Norman type deal. But then you kind of see the next scene where Peter Parker finds out that Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, is essentially with Aunt May. And I don't think a lot of people know about this, but the foundation of Feast, which is a pretty big comic foundation, even if you played Spider-Man PS4, they even show that. It was pretty cool to see that. And that's where we kind of start taking place of how Peter Parker's arc was kind of starting to go, because his identity has been revealed, and at this point he screwed up the universe, and now he just wants to stop making mistakes, because essentially in Spider-Man Homecoming, he's made mistakes that his suit was taken away, and Far From Home, essentially he's made another bad mistake where he gives a high piece of tech from Tony Stark to a Mysterio to a very evil villain. He just keeps making mistakes. And in this film, he makes a huge mistake where it's like, you need to learn from your mistakes and stop making them. And then, pretty much they take Norman Osborn back to Doctor Strange's back cave a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's where they start having the interaction of who's dead and who's actually alive. And that was a pretty scary scene. And then they're just starting to talk about it. And then Peter wants to make the decision of, his first decision was just bringing them back to their universe. And then as he starts listening to their stories, he wants to kind of give a redeeming quality because of what Aunt May said. And then next thing you know, Doctor Strange comes in with pretty much the spell that's gone wrong to fix all this, but the villains all end up going back, dying from where they left off of their death in all the Spider-Man films. And then that's when the big battle pretty much starts with between Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. Now, I want to know what your thoughts are on that scene. I think it was absolutely amazing.
I thought the way they executed was perfect. I felt the way how it ended was even more hilarious. The fact that just Spider-Man he didn't essentially win, he just trapped him and then bailed, because that would be something that he would do in that scenario, which I felt like was the perfect way to do it essentially. So that's kind of my thought on it.
Yeah, and then definitely when I saw that, I mean, that was great. One of the things that they touched on was, even in Endgame, when the disappearance happened, Doctor Strange isn't Sorcerer Supreme. It's actually Wong that's the Sorcerer Supreme, which is a great take, because I think he gets more power being titled Sorcerer Supreme. So, and I think that makes sense, because when I saw the trailers, I'm like, why is Doctor Strange still acting goofy? Because in Infinity War, he was being very serious as holding the Eye of Agamotto. But showing this is that he's not the Sorcerer Supreme, so I still think he can make mistakes. But let's get to a big scene where he's fighting, essentially not fighting, but trying to run away from Doctor Strange. And Doctor Strange essentially catches him and then throws Peter Parker out of his astral form. And then he's talking about it. And then you can actually see, if you look at Peter Parker's head, you can see his iconic Spider-Man, spider senses tingling. It's very subtle. You could have missed it. I mean, I've seen this film already 3 times. So um, even when Doctor Strange is trying to take the box from Peter Parker's physical body, his sense is still reacting and avoiding from Doctor Strange trying to grab that box. And I think that
Yeah.
was absolutely cool to
Mhm.
see, of how his spider sense is still working even though Peter Parker's not in his body.
Yeah.
And that was just a great scene all over, where it was kind of um, a lot of people talked about the scene where it didn't make sense how Spider-Man actually defeated Doctor Strange, and essentially they explained it in the scene. It was pretty much magic versus math,
Mhm.
essentially, and I liked that part. That was starting to give me a hint of where Peter is becoming more independent.
Mhm.
And essentially, when he ends the battle, I mean, he just grabs the ring, and then Doctor
Yeah.
Strange is pretty much stuck in the mirror dimension.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then that shows the big hint of actually Ned has powers. And that was pretty cool to see. And
Yeah.
sorry if I'm taking up a lot of this
No,
podcast,
go,
but
dude. You're fine. Don't worry.
um for MJ, the character Michelle Jones, they even, hint um Michelle Jones's last name is actually Watson when she was being interrogated by the damage control, essentially. That was pretty cool, meaning that, she is pretty much the main character, just a little bit of changes for the character arc. Um, I liked this MJ out of all of
Yeah.
the love interests. I think she was very supportive. She was very cool. The first few films was a bit edgy for me. It was kind of a bit hard, but how they handled her in this last film was just great. And
Mhm.
then Ned was absolutely great too, especially knowing that he actually has a little bit of magic in him, which is
Yeah.
awesome.
Sort of.
And
Yeah. Sort of kind of transitioning into that, I figured. So essentially, Peter tries to fix the heroes. It fires, and they all break out. Meanwhile, while all this is kind of going on, Ned and MJ actually have the box, and Peter said if something goes wrong, press the button, and they all go home.
oh yeah,
Home.
and I
So
just want to touch in that little section that you talked about. I
yeah.
mean, the part where he wants to help the villains
Hmm.
was great, and you find out that it's actually the suit maker from Far From Home.
Yeah.
Yeah, Far From Home, and that was great. And just the little touches and the little remarks there, it was
Hmm.
absolutely
Yeah.
cool just to see that. And then
Hmm.
I think this is where the middle of the movie starts happening, where it starts to get a little bit more difficult,
Hmm.
where you see Peter Parker starting to cure Doctor Strange, Electro, and Goblin next, which was
Yeah.
just great and cool to see.
Yeah.
And then they start touching on a worry of mine, where Norman Osborn talks to Peter like, "You're really cool. If you want to come to my universe and live there, essentially to be part." I was starting to get concerned because
Yeah.
we didn't know if this was still going to stay in the MCU or go back into a Sony universe. Essentially,
Right.
that was my concern. And then that's when I think a really cool scene, and how they shot Peter Parker's scene was
Hmm.
cool. Was Peter can feel something going wrong, his spider sense is tingling,
Hmm.
and then next thing you know is that you find out that Norman Osborn is still the Goblin.
Hmm. And then
Essentially, we all kind of knew that
yeah.
happening. And then everything starts going wild. People are
Mhm.
starting to regret that they wanted their powers.
Yeah.
And the fight scene between Norman Osborn and Peter Parker was just, it was amazing
Hmm.
and just so brutal. I mean, what'd you think of that scene? I mean, it was just crazy.
I thought it was insane too, just because there seemed to be a lot of emotion between both, like it has always been between like the Green Goblin and Peter Parker, just or like Peter Parker and Spider-Man, just because it still feels like he wants to try and save Norman because he's obviously Osborn, he's obviously friends with Harry and he doesn't want it to hurt him in some way. I just kind of feel like there's still that connection to where their fights get really personal. So
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm gonna say this: when there's a hallway scene where Peter's just absolutely on top of Norman and he's just punching him, and then Norman's not even really reacting on it. he likes that type of stuff that's happening to Peter, essentially trying to change Peter's morals. And then this is where I'm going to start getting a little off board and talking about the DC universe with Willem Dafoe.
Yeah.
If people have seen Aquaman, Willem Dafoe is actually the mentor for Aquaman. And when I saw this film, I felt like they just missed a big casting choice. And where I'm just going to say this, and a lot of people could probably agree, but I think Willem Dafoe could play as a great Joker.
Well, no, they actually, you've seen, they have done the trailer for it. They have a trailer. They are working on having him play the Joker, I think, at some point.
You think? I mean, if they do that, I think that would be a great step in a direction, because Willem Dafoe, his face structure, his age, and his laugh is just like, you could play a great Joker.
He just has that aura, especially like, I feel like the one thing is his like voice, his iconic voice. Like, I feel like he has that unique voice that no one else really has, I'd say.
Oh yeah, and playing as a Joker would just be an easy character for him, even though he played as Green Goblin. I think it would be a great casting choice.
Yeah.
Now let's get to the scene where it starts hitting the feels,
and
it starts getting sad. So at the end of the fight scene between Goblin is essentially just on Peter's throat. At first I thought, is he going to try to kill him or something like that? And then Aunt May is right there. She has the cures essentially with her. And Aunt May was going to fight for Peter because, she loves him. Essentially, she doesn't want him hurt. She's going to do whatever she can. And then you hear the Goblin's words, these certain words that I absolutely got scared of. And you can see his glider come right behind the building and essentially right behind Aunt May. And the next thing you know, it goes right through her, essentially hitting her and putting her down to the ground. And then just Green Goblin goes on it and throws a couple of goblin bombs. And it gets so emotional right there. And then Green Goblin leaves, and then Peter is having essentially what we're going to say is probably the last final talk with Aunt May, as she starts talking to him, and he starts talking about how he keeps screwing up everything as Spider-Man. And then we finally hear the iconic words that we've always wanted to hear in a different manner, but I still think it was cool, which Aunt May talks about, what you have is a gift, and great power comes with great responsibility. And right after you kind of heard that, because they were kind of saying that, hey, Aunt May's okay, she's okay. She was saying that, but right after she said that, you kind of see the scene as it progresses. She starts not following Peter. As you can tell, she's actually hurt. And that scene where it's the final moments, I think, was just beautifully acted by Tom Holland, throwing everything he can throw in this scene.
Yeah.
And it was just absolutely sad with how it ended. What'd you think of that scene?
I thought it was definitely, like, I kind of always had the feeling like Aunt May was probably not going to make it, just because it adds a lot more to the adult, if they do continue this series, which I think they could, it adds more to the adulthood of Peter's life, because he really had to go, for the longest time, had to be on his own, learn to figure things out for himself, I'd say.
Oh yeah. And she was essentially, with Peter Parker's Spider-Man, essentially he has a lot of loved ones that know that he is Spider-Man. Essentially, a lot of people do, even the Avengers kind of. And we start seeing that it's taking a toll now. The people that know are in trouble with their life if they know that Peter Parker's Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And that scene where Aunt May dies is just sad. And we haven't talked about J. Jonah Jameson coming back as J.K. Simmons, which he kind of plays along in the film of making it worse.
He really just he gets introduced at the end of Homecoming. I feel like he's sort of like someone who really adds to the story of Spider-Man. The guy who's just says he's a villain, he's nothing more than a bum, that kind of person. person, which helps kind of motivate Peter to prove, always kind of motivates Spider-Man to be like, I'm gonna prove you wrong, that I can be the hero.
Oh yeah.
But yeah,
And then now we're starting to catch up to your area of where we
the
see
part that
MJ and
yeah
Ned sitting
at,
together at
yeah,
essentially Ned's aunt or grandma's house, I think.
something like that. And then they're like just keep saying like they wish they could see Peter, and then thus begins the start. Thus we see Ned have powers, and he starts opening a portal, and thus begins the birth of an infamous meme I saw on the internet where it's all three of the Spider-Man in different costumes pointing at each other, like the infamous
Oh
Spider-Man
yeah. Oh yeah.
meme. And it's like, yes, because we then see this taller looking, we then see like a shot of the dark alley, and then a Spider-Man running towards it. It pops out. It's too tall to be Tom Holland. They rips
Oh
off
yeah.
the mask. It's Andrew Garfield.
Garfield. I mean,
Literally, he went on 3 different interviews lying through his teeth that he wasn't doing this film.
oh yeah.
And
I mean,
he
yeah.
he surprised the world essentially.
Oh yeah. I mean, no doubt. Like I said, I when I was watching those interviews, I know he was lying because leaks essentially got to me. But when I saw that, I'm like, this is essentially great because you know who the next Spider-Man character is going to show up.
Yeah.
Tobey Maguire. But I mean, just for a couple minutes, they just wanted to kind of show like what Andrew Garfield's showing. I mean, just the funny scene between MJ, Ned, and Peter Parker and the grandma essentially was just hilarious.
Yeah. It's
And
just
then
like we just see him as more the goofier Spider-Man
oh
man,
yeah,
essentially. So
and then I want to have the honors to talk about the next Spider-Man, which probably is our favorite Spider-Man. They
yeah.
want to go again, find Peter Parker, and then next thing you know, you just see the portal open up, and then you just see
The man, the myth,
the
the
man, the
legend.
legend. Yeah, everybody thinks it's just a character, but the audience knows that it's Tobey Maguire's original Spider-Man from 2002, which is just absolutely amazing. He is definitely older, you can tell, but then this is where it just starts getting wild. I mean, in the movie theater, I don't know what kind of audience you've had, but we were absolutely just
Oh yeah.
screaming.
People were
Um,
people were insane for both when Garfield came out, but and both Maguire essentially. Both
yeah.
were
I
pretty crazy.
I mean, I'm gonna pretty much talk about this right now, and I'm gonna be proud of this moment. But when Aunt May died, from that part of that film to the ending of the movie, even when I got home, I was crying through this entire film, just through that scene where Aunt May dies, and then when this film was attacking my feels so bad. I mean, I was just crying through half of the ending of the film, and essentially, everybody knows that at this point, there's one that essentially died of Aunt May in that blast of that building. And then that's where we finally see where they find Peter Parker as before. I don't want to get too ahead, but Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield gets to have the introduction to themselves. It was a very funny scene because they're webbing up each other,
Yeah.
and it was just absolutely so cool. And then essentially how they just kind of took these two characters of Andrew and Maguire's is, well, Toby's Spider-Man is very old. He's older, but he's aged, and he's kind of like the wise Spider-Man, where this path is a good Spider-Man essentially. And then they show in Garfield's Spider-Man where he's failed, and essentially he's kind of like a depressed Spider-Man. He just the mistakes that he's made, he can't get over them.
Yeah.
And then you finally see a scene where you see all three Spider-Man together. The MCU's Spider-Man is just incredibly hurt, emotional. I mean, essentially, he was trying to push those other Spider-Mans away because he wants to be done being Spider-Man. And then the scene where they finally get to a point where they start going their routes of their origin stories of, Tobey Maguire saying essentially that he tracked the man that killed Uncle Ben, and you find out that it wasn't his killer. It was somebody else.
Hmm.
And he regretted that essentially. And he had to live with that. And then not Toby, but Andrew Garfield, his huge loss was you know, when Uncle Ben died, he was a very violent Spider-Man. And then the things that definitely changed the Spider-Man characters was, when essentially the burglar he killed the burglar, uh, it took an effect on him that changed a different type of Spider-Man. And then Andrew Garfield, where Gwen Stacy died, he stopped pulling his punches. He got
Yeah.
bitter. He became a broken Spider-Man. And then finally,
Mhm.
they all said the words of great power comes with great responsibility. Starting, I think this is the part where they were starting to create a new Spider-Man in the MCU,
Mhm.
which I was starting to get so excited and, like I said, very scared because I don't know what the end of the film was going to show us.
Mhm.
But and then the next scene was they're in the lab
They're all
making all the cures,
they're all
and
making
I'm
references. So
and I'm telling you this, that scene is just so meme worthy. I mean,
yeah.
we could just,
Yeah, you could go
I mean, let's just get
hours with
into it.
that. But yeah, it's just like, they're making all these references like my best friend, like Tobey Maguire's character is talking with Ned. He's like, "So do you have a best friend?" I
Yeah.
did, but he tried to kill me. So, and he died in my
It
arms. And it's like so
and it broke his heart.
and it broke his heart. Yeah. And it's like just so many good memes, but I figured like the one thing I want to talk about is like the organic the towards the end there's like the organic web scene where
Oh yes,
with
yes.
McGuire where
That
he
was
just shoots his webs and they're and both uh Garfield and Holland are like, you can do that? I have to make my
oh
own
yeah.
webs. Same. And it's like just so good.
I
Good.
mean, when
So
they did that, it was just so funny and it was so cool. Especially had Andrew. I think even though Andrew's character was, they're hinting that he's the most broken, but he was still the most funny in the film. The way how he just kind of did the quips, it was just, oh, they played the characters so beautifully, and there was no change whatsoever. Um, but yeah, I mean, even in the lab scene where there was a cute little scene between the MCU's Peter and MJ where they were talking about how they're going to get through this. And then you kind of see Andrew Garfield's, looking over at MJ and the MCU Peter. And then he starts talking to Toby's Peter, saying that, hey, I guess it's just not in the cards for us. And then it kind of gives you a hint, a little bit of clarification what happened at the
mhm.
end of Spider-Man 3, where they didn't get together with his MJ, but
Yeah.
it sounds like they made it work at a certain point of the story of Tobey
Yeah.
Maguire's, and which was I think, a good clarification that Mary Jane and Peter Parker could have gotten married,
Yeah.
and I think that was cool. It's just Andrew Garfield just didn't have that in his cards,
Mhm.
and essentially Toby's like, you should still go try to find that MJ for you,
Yeah.
and you don't have to live a terrible life.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And
kind of
then
I figured out.
yeah, go ahead.
So kind of the next one is like the big fight scene, but I figured like my big thing is I saw like a few major parts. Like obviously, like just to kind of go over it briefly, like it's like beforehand, they're kind of talking about like what's the weirdest thing you've ever fought. Toby says like Venom, the original Venom. Andrew says like uh I Rhino, and I forget what Tom Holland says. I think did he say
He,
he Thanos or something or
yeah, he was like, I fought a big green purple alien from another planet, and then they're all like, where? How did you go to another planet and fight an alien? And
yeah
that was just very funny.
yeah
Um, and then fighting the alien goo for Spider-Man 3, and then
mhm,
essentially going to Andrew Garfield's where he's like, I'm lame, I just fought a rhino. Which you start seeing Tobey Maguire stepping in. He's like, no, you shouldn't be talking to
yeah.
yourself that
He
way.
starts trying to build himself confidence,
Yeah,
but
pretty
yeah
much. I mean, it was a very great scene. And then as they're starting to get ready, one more scene I think is meme worthy too is where you see Andrew Garfield helped crack
Oh,
Tobey
the back
Maguire's
crack.
back.
I forgot about that.
That
Yeah.
was a funny scene, and it was just absolutely
Yeah.
cute, and it was
Mhm.
awesome.
But yeah,
Um,
yeah.
let's
As
just start ripping into it.
in terms of the fight scene, I feel like obviously I feel like each fight was important because when they won, because their goal was they were trying to cure it. They were trying to fix it. They were able to fix Sandman, Green Guy. They were able to fix all the villains ultimately, but the one that actually helped them was Doc Ock,
Oh
surprisingly.
yeah,
So yeah, he
because
was the one who kind of stopped Electrode, and he only stopped Electrode. I think it was Maguire. I think it was Garfield who stopped Sandman, and then Maguire who stopped or no, it was Holland who stopped Connors, and then
hmm
I believe it was, I forget who Maguire did. I think he did, or no, he didn't do the lizard.
Maguire did Sandman.
Oh yeah.
Andrew, I don't know, Andrew. It was Doctor Octopus who saved Electro, and then Maguire who got Sandman, and then Holland for the lizard.
Hmm.
And then who else was there? I'm trying to remember. It was essentially, I think, Goblin at
Yeah,
the
Goblin was
end.
toward the end, so
Yeah, for some reason I feel like we're missing an important character,
yeah.
a villain.
Which we
Um,
apologize if we do, but yeah.
and
I'd
then
say, yeah,
oh yeah,
I kind of say like the things that stuck out to me was like obviously there was the scene where MJ was falling and Garfield saved it. I feel like that was a nice touch because it kind of like
it was
symbolized how much it kind of also re-symbolized the whole Gwen Stacy sort of dilemma he had, like the fact he couldn't save her essentially.
and that's where I'm saying where how this film gives redeeming qualities from past characters that we did. You definitely could tell that Andrew Garfield learned from his mistakes, and just when I saw that was another prediction I had. I thought that'd be so cool if Andrew saved MJ instead of Tom Holland's peer. But I think that was a cool emotional scene. You could
Yeah.
just tell it broke his heart, even though he saved her. He still wishes that he could have done that with
Yeah.
Gwen. But it was still an awesome scene
Hmm.
between those characters. It was
Hmm.
great.
Yeah. And then I'd say like the other big like important scene is towards the end when Goblin shows up and both he and he and Tom Holland are fighting on like the disc that's in the water, and
Mhm.
essentially like Andrew steps in like when Goblin's almost about to kill him and tries to
Yeah,
stop him from like ruining everything, tries to stop him from like going down the path of this evil Spider-Man essentially.
and essentially it's essentially where Toby and Garfield went down that path a little bit, kind of hinting that these are a bit different Spider-Man, and showing that this is not the path that they're going on in a
Yeah.
film direction.
Hmm.
And I thought it was great. And I'm like, it essentially Toby was the wise Spider-Man saying that don't make the mistakes that we did, and
Yeah.
essentially saying that we're going to stop you if you're going to try to go
Hmm.
down this path, so you can
Yeah.
understand that having this rageful hatefulness is not going to be the best Spider-Man. You want to be the best Spider-Man by not letting that overtake you.
Yeah.
And then the next scene where this was a big shock, I think, where Goblin stabs Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man.
Hmm.
And honestly, uh, I was a bit scared there for a second because I'm
Yeah.
like, are they
It was
really?
like, did you just kill him?
I mean, I don't really want to bash other franchises, but Star Wars, when they killed off Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, I thought this was the route that they were going on, saying like, "Hey, we're gonna kill the nostalgia so you can get ready for this modern take." And no, it was pretty much just a cheap trick saying that, "Hey, no, we're just here to scare you.
Yeah.
We're not gonna actually get rid of this iconic
Yeah.
character."
You know how
And
many
then,
people would be pissed?
oh yeah, I mean, I would have been. I think if that happened, the film would have flopped essentially.
Oh yeah,
But
definitely.
uh, then uh, Tom Holland, right after Tobey Maguire gets stabbed, Tom Holland does the right thing and technically gets rid of the goblin virus in Norman, and shows that he is going to be probably the next best Spider-Man that he can be.
Yeah.
And then Doctor Strange shows up, and then the universe starts splitting, showing that there's other villains from other universes that can show up. I don't know if you could see it, but I saw the Rhino, I
Yeah.
saw Craven, I saw the Lizard. I mean, you could see all these different villains that were about to burst through. And then it kind of goes back to the beginning of the film where he tells Doctor Strange that we need to fix this, and I'm going to take responsibility for it. And the only way to reverse the first spell was saying, hey, make a spell where everybody forgets about Peter Parker, and
Yeah.
not just Spider-Man, was where Peter Parker, where essentially that's how
Never
they're going to
existed.
undo the spell. Yeah. And there was a cute scene where you can finally see where he's with the other Spider-Man saying that, thank you for helping. And we're gonna have to go back, but I'm gonna try to finish up the story for us, for
Yeah.
the audience. But we'll hit another few favorite scenes. But essentially saying goodbye to the other Spider-Man, and then find this emotional scene with he has to say goodbye to his friend Ned and his girlfriend MJ, which that scene was an absolute cool scene. And then he says goodbye to Doctor Strange. Now, I don't know, actually I'm not gonna tell you yet. We'll talk about it at the ending, because
Yeah.
it's just, I think, have you seen the movie again, or have you seen it once?
Yeah, I've seen it again. So
Okay, so you'll understand the scene that I'll talk about later. But talk about the next scene. What happens right after that,
yeah, essentially after that, Peter tries to go see MJ and Ned to try and rejog their memory, but instead he doesn't, because he feels like it's probably better that it kind of feels like it's better that he starts his journey, his sort of this new journey, essentially. Like the main goal he wanted to do was he ultimately was trying to fix their lives because they were associated with him. And when
Yep.
reality is, I feel like it kind of set the dynamic, like sometimes it might be better just to let people kind of let something be free, essentially. So he essentially
Yeah.
just let Ned and MJ go for the time being while he went on to continue his own journey as Spider-Man. Essentially, he
Yeah.
got an apartment, started his GED, and essentially began his own journey into being
Yeah.
Spider-Man.
So I'm going to talk about that scene too, where he goes in to see MJ. I mean, just that scene, when you see him walk in, he already kind of looks older, just the way he dresses. I mean, he looked like he already matured at that scene, even after the battle. And then you can kind of tell it's been probably a couple months, maybe a little bit, because I think snow was already going down in New
Yeah.
York. And then, yeah, like what you said, he just essentially just not tells them to keep them safe, because them knowing is a danger to their lives and essentially can affect everything that they have. And then he just decides not to tell them, but it looks like he'll probably watch closely by, or personally just be friends with them, but not as Spider-Man and Peter Parker, but just Peter Parker.
Yeah.
And then going to the scene of the apartment. Now, I'm going to say this. I thought we were going to see Spider-Man 2, Mr. Dickovich, the property manager, because you hear a guy saying the rent is due on the first of the month. Don't be late. I thought we were going to see him. It was going to be like a funny scene. But no, essentially, no. You kind of just see him move in the apartment. Definitely, he looks like he had his doubts, but it was a hopeful future for him. And like you said, he's going to start his GED, get into school some way, and then at the end you see him with a sewing kit, and then you see him jump out, and then you finally see, I think, is the most comic accurate suit. That is just absolutely amazing. And the final web swing, I've had problems with Tom Holland's web swing. It looks very messy, but I think this is going to be the beginning of where
Hmm.
you're going to see that you're going to see a great Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And just how they ended it was just, it was very
Mhm.
sad, but it's very cool how they ended it though.
Yeah.
Um, and that's just how Spider-Man ended. And
Mhm.
personally, I think this is one of my favorite films out of
Yeah.
probably the five
I
that I
will.
like.
I will say that too. And I know you mentioned it earlier. You said you didn't think they were going to do it. I think they could. I'd say there's a high chance because here's my thing. There are two
Mhm.
things. Like the first one was something we kind of missed during that fight scene towards the end. Electro actually referenced like, how come there's not a black Spider-Man or African American Spider-Man? And then he's
Yeah,
like, I hope there's probably a like black Spider-Man out there, which could possibly tease like maybe a Miles Morales timeline because
yeah,
you know, people really have high praise for Intro to the Spider Verse. So I think like I wouldn't rule out the possibility they could be like maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to look at a Miles Morales time sort of
yeah.
universe because I feel
Um,
like it could definitely be possible.
sure. I mean, so I don't know if you know this, but so the producer of Spider-Man is that it's been confirmed that they're making another trilogy with Tom Holland, essentially three more, where I think it's going to hit the college years, where this is going to see, I think, the Spider-Man that we've always wanted to see from the comics, where
Yeah.
he's going to be quippy and, he's going to have those epic web swing, scenes, and just kind of actually see that when there's a villain going to show up, it's not going to be his fault. Essentially, this villain will rise just because of through the public. Um, and
Mhm.
that's what I'm really excited for. And then keeping his identity to the minimum is going to be
Mhm.
great. I mean, I'm just excited for what they're going to show
Yeah,
next in the next Spider-Man film.
because
And then, yeah,
the final thing that I feel like really hinted that they're just getting started with this was the the post credit scene where we see Tom Hardy Venom just
yeah,
down in like Aruba or something like that, just drinking and all that with Venom, and then we see as he's sort of portaling back to his own universe, a little goop of Venom is left behind and starts
yeah.
moving. So
And I'm going to say this, I'm glad that they went that route because for
yeah.
me, I cannot get on board with the Venom movies. I do not like how they get to, I mean, it's a great new iteration, but I didn't understand like how would this be a great villain against Spider-Man when they're trying to make this Venom kind of like a hero essentially. And they
Yeah.
kind of explain it. They just say, "Hey, they're going to split Venoms,
Yeah, split
this
them up.
Venom is going to be here, this Venom is going to be in the MCU, and that's going to be the birth of,
Yeah.
essentially another black suit Spider-Man." Um and then so we're gonna get that's essentially what happens. And then they at the end credits that they show the Doctor Strange trailer.
Mhm.
And that's how it pretty much ends. But so a few scenes I want to talk about with you is that if you notice this, so when Peter is saying his goodbyes to everyone and he's about to about to leave the Statue of Liberty essentially, did you hear that his theme changed a little bit where
Mhm.
you could hear Tom Holland's theme, a little bit of Tobey Maguire's theme, and Andrew Garfield's theme, all incorporated into one, making it like a new Spider-Man has been born.
I
Have did you
didn't
actually
I didn't hear
did
that,
you
but
hear?
it could if I missed it, then yeah, I mean that would be really cool if they included something like that, but I missed it
Yeah.
sadly. So
Just the theme. I mean, the theme. I could probably send you a video of the theme, but when I heard that, I'm like, that is a great theme. Just incorporating all three of them for this Spider-Man was just absolutely amazing. And then the few scenes we'll talk about is that they had some nostalgia scenes, which I don't know if you caught on, but when basically on the bridge, you can see Doctor Octopus throwing cars over the bridge, and then you can see Spider Man catching them with the webs,
mhm.
and then going down and checking on the families, and essentially that MIT director woman. You can actually hint that's a scene from Amazing Spider-Man 1 where where Spider-Man's first big responsibility scene was where Lizard was throwing the cars off the bridges and he was webbing them up off the bridge. That was referencing that scene, which I don't know if you noticed that, but I'm like, that was so absolutely cool.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the next scene was the lab scene where the Lizard was attacking MJ and Ned. That was another scene from Amazing Spider-Man. And then another hint of a Spider-Man film was the Statue of Liberty. And you can see the scaffolding all around the Statue of Liberty was actually a reference to Spider-Man 3, their final battle scene
the
when
final
they were parading.
battle in the construction zone. Yeah.
Yep. So, and then those are the scenes. I wish I could be more in depth, but that would take all day to talk about.
Yeah, but yeah.
And then a couple more scenes I just want to quickly iterate is that let's just talk about Andrew Garfield saying that he always wanted brothers and he just technically has brothers that are exactly pretty much the same alias as him, just in different universes, which was really funny and a really cute scene. And then when Andrew Garfield was saying that he loved the other Peters, that was a very, very cute scene.
Definitely.
And then one of my last scenes, I think you can agree was the funniest, was where they're getting beat up by the villains and they huddle together and then they talk about, hey, we haven't worked as a team. I've never worked on a team before. And then the MCU Peters is like, hey, I've worked on a team before called the Avengers.
Yeah, and they're like, who's that? It's like, is it a band?
Is it a band? And then
great.
Toby's just like, how's this helping? And then essentially Peter leads the team. But that's where you can find, I don't know if you noticed, but that scene when they're actually together, you see them pointing at each other, finally completing that meme, which was absolutely fun. And then like the ending where they are web swinging together was absolutely cool.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's all I have to say about the film. I mean, like I said, I could go on and on and on about the movies, and it was just great.
You've kind of hit everything on the head, dude. Like, overall, I would consider this to be one of, if not the best Spider-Man movie Marvel's ever put out in general. So overall, I kind of just kind of wanted to ask you one thing before we wrap up. Like, on a scale from like 1 to 10, 1 being like, don't see this movie, it's not worth your time, to 10 being like something that could be in contention for, like, say, I don't know, an Academy Award, where would you put this?
Because I've definitely heard the rumors that they're gonna try to go for the Academy Awards with this film. I'm gonna say that I am going to push it at a 10 for this moment. Just because the nostalgia of seeing the old Spider-Man and just how much the acting really was bumped up to this film. I think it was just because of how all these actors that kind of came in are basically saying that, hey, this could be your last film before they did another contract and make another trilogy for future films to happen. Was that they're like, all right, I got to give it my all in this. And I think it could be Academy Award worthy. I don't really follow the Academy Awards that much, but I could definitely see it being a nomination in the film. But yeah, I mean, I think that was a great question, but I'd say this is a 10.
Yeah, I can echo that. Well, regardless, man, I really appreciate you coming on here, and we definitely got to do this again for more stuff in the future. It's been a pleasure.
I mean, if you definitely want to talk about Marvel films, video games, I mean, basically all the nerdy stuff, I would love to come back and just keep talking about it with you. I mean, just to even continue the Spider-Man aspect of our opinions is just really awesome, and we could probably look at something there. But I really enjoyed being on your podcast today, and it was awesome, and I cannot wait if I can return to come back to your podcast.
So, thank you so much again, and that'll be it for us today. Hope to see you back here again soon, everyone. Peace.